and welcome to another episode. In today's episode, I am going to be talking about CSS opacity. But before we get started, if you are new to my channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you find this video useful, share it with someone else. And if you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Also, if you want to support my channel, I am going to leave the PayPal link in the description below. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so to get started with CSS opacity, I need you to visit the same website we've been coding so far with, which is w3schools.com. You will go to the CSS section and you're going to jump all the way down to where it says CSS opacity. As well, have opened the same website we've been coding so far and the code. Now, what I am going to do is make sure that I erase all the style that we applied in our previous episode. And I am also going to delete all the content that we input into our index.html file. I'm going to make sure I save both of those and hit refresh. And boom, now we have a white page to start with. Okay, so CSS opacity, we've seen this in our previous chapters, but in this video, I want to cover a little bit better and a little bit more in depth what exactly you can do in websites using this property. So let's go back to W3 Schools and let's read a little bit. CSS opacity, it's a property that specifies the opacity or the transparency of an element. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Okay. Now let me show you a couple of things you can do with this. The opacity property can take values from 0 to 1. Now the lower the value, the more transparent the image or the more transparent whatever element you're using on it, right? So here we have an opacity of 0.2. Here's an opacity of 0.5 and the default, which is 1. Now, as you can see, with the value 1, you have the image is not transparent at all. Now with 0.2, the image is very blurry, right? So you can barely see it. Now you can go ahead and actually try this yourself. So in this example, I am going to show you exactly how the opacity works on an image, okay? So let's add first an image into our index.html file. So let's do an image and let's apply the images from images. That's my folder. And then we're going to select the picture with the puppy. Here, that's the one we are going to use. Let's hit save there and let's make sure that we give this image a style. Okay, so what we're going to do is give it a width of let's say 500 pixels. And then I am also going to apply a height here of 500 pixels just to make it square. Okay, now I'm hitting save and let's hit refresh. And boom, here's the puppy image. Now to this image, what we are going to do is apply the opacity property. So you can see how this is going to be changing. Now, if I apply the opacity according to the example, 0.5 is it's like the mid-range opacity, right? So let's give the image a 0.5 value. Okay, going back to our code, let's hit refresh. And boom, you see how now the image has changed and it's a little bit transparent. If I go ahead and I lower this to 0.3, let's hit save. Now this is even more transparent. Now if I do an opacity of 0, let's hit save and I hit refresh. Now you cannot see it. It's totally transparent. So the lower the value, the more transparent the image is going to be. Now, if I apply an opacity of 1, let's hit save and let's hit refresh. Boom, now there is no transparency at all. So 1 is the value you're going to give to an image or to an element if you don't want that to be transparent. And that's actually the default value for opacity. If you want to make it go transparent, you know what to do. Just go ahead and lower that one to all the way to 0 if you want that image to be fully transparent. Okay, now that you know how the opacity works, let's go ahead and let's work with a couple of effects. Here are some examples in how you can use a pseudo class like hover in order to change the image. Each image could be changed. And the way that you change these images is very simple. You only have to use the hover pseudo class. And when you hover over the image, you can give certain amount of opacity. Okay, so here we have an example. Here is the code. We already have an image. Now the image has an opacity of 1, default opacity, right? Meaning that the image right now, it's not transparent. Now, what happens if I go ahead and I say image, and then we apply the hover state or the hover pseudo class? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to apply the hover pseudo class, and inside I am going to change the opacity. Now the opacity here is going to change, but instead of it, here you see the example actually what it does is that when we hover over the element, right, the image turns to not being transparent. So the value changes to 1. Now, when you do not hover over it, it goes to kind of transparent, right? So in my case, I'm going to do something totally different. I'm actually going to type into our code that when I hover over the image, then the opacity is going to be 0. Let's do 0, just 0. Okay, so that way when I hover over the image, it's going to disappear. So I'm going to hit save. Going back to our code, I'm going to hit refresh. But before I do that, take a look at this. Right now I am hovering over the image because I haven't hit refresh, right? Now if I hit refresh and we apply the pseudo class of hover, take a look and what's going to happen when I hover over it. You see? Now it's gone. If I don't hover over it, the puppy is there. If I hover over it, the puppy is no longer there. That is only because I apply an opacity of 0. Now I can go ahead and change this, and I can apply an opacity of 0. Let's say 0.2. I'm going to hit save, and now let's hit refresh. So now when I hover over the image, it's not fully transparent, but it has a 20% opacity in there, so you can barely see it. But you can give this effect by using the hover state. Okay, so I hope that so far this has been super clear. Go ahead and play around with your code and with some images and how you can make them fully transparent, or how you can make them be in the default state. Well, actually for that, I don't think you're going to need to code because that's the default, as I said. But the best thing you can do is just practice with this. Okay, now moving on here, another thing that I do want to explain in opacity is that you can also apply opacity to divisions or to elements, okay? And here we have a couple of examples. Now we're going to hit here where it says try it yourself on the website. And here we're going to see a couple of examples in how you can apply different type of opacities to your divisions. Okay, so what I am going to do here is just take all the divisions that were input in this example. Okay, we're going to hit copy. And now I am going to delete the image I added here, and I am going to input all the divisions, okay? And we're not going to touch the classes. I'm going to leave the class as first, second, and third, as you can see here. And then we're going to use the same opacity example so that you can see how this is going to work. So I'm going to hit save now. Going back to our style, I will delete the style here, hitting save there as well, and let's hit refresh. And boom, here I have the 3 divisions. Now, into our style, we are going to use the same style that was used in this example. If you see here, they use a background color and some padding for each div. So what I am going to do is the same thing as well. So for each division, let's go ahead and let's use a background color. Now, in this case, I will use red as an example, just so you can see it, okay? And then we are going to use the same padding amount, the same padding size, which is going to be just 10 pixels for each div. Okay, I'm going to save this. Going back to our code, let's hit refresh. And boom, here you have all 4 divs, as you can see, red. Now, right now it looks terrible, but we're going to apply an opacity to each div. Okay, so to do that, we're going to use the class. So to the first division, let's use div.first. Why? Because first is the class, right? This is going to be applied for the first paragraph. And the opacity that we're going to use is going to be 0.1. so it can become like this. Okay, but in red, obviously. Okay, so let's do that. Let's use to the first division an opacity of 0.1. I'm going to hit save. Going back to our code, let's hit refresh. And boom, you see how now this has changed and it's very transparent. Okay, so now let's try the second example, which is going to be 0.3 on the second division. So let's use division second, and we're going to apply an opacity as well of 0.3. Yep, 0.3. So let's hit save. Going back to our code, let's hit refresh, and boom, you see that's 30% of transparency. Moving on to the next one, division, and I think this one is third, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is third. So the division will be third, and we're going to apply an opacity to this one of 0.6. Okay, so let's do 0.6. Let's hit save, and now I'm going to hit refresh, and boom, here you go, an opacity of 60%. So to the last one, I don't have to apply any type of opacity because, again, by default, the opacity is 1. So this same example in green, you can see it here in red. So that's what happened when you use opacity to different divisions. Now, there is one more thing that I do want to show you here today, and is that you can also apply transparency to your codes if you use an Rgba. We have seen how we can style different colors using Rgba colors. So here we can do the same to opacity. And the only reason that you would like to apply opacity using Rgba is because if you go ahead and you can see the example here, let's go back to our website. If you go ahead and you check this out, each time that you apply an opacity to the entire element, then every child element inside of that element will also inherit the same opacity, meaning that the paragraph that you see there, you can barely see it because it has the same opacity as its parent. So let me show you another example here using Rgba colors. We are going to leave the same code that we just applied, and the only thing that I am going to do, it's use more divisions, but this time we're going to apply some Rgba colors to it. Now, to show you this, we're going to go to W3 Schools, and we're going to hit here the example that says try it yourself. Now, in this example, you will see here some colors that has been applied with Rgba and some others that has been applied with the opacity property. So here we have different divisions, okay? What I am going to do here is let's just apply some lines here, okay? There you go. Just some spaces. And I'm going to copy all this. I am going to copy all this. And this is going to be called first, and we're going to add the number 1 at the end. Second, we're going to add the number 2 at the end. And then third, I'm going to apply the number 3 at the end. Okay, so I'm going to hit save. And now going back to our code, let's hit refresh. Now, as you can see, all of them has been added with color of red. And in fact, I'm also going to apply the same division for the last one. Okay, let's hit save. There you go. So now, what I want to show you is how you can apply the Rgba with opacity. Here, to the first example, as you can see, the opacity is 10%. So we are going to use Rgba colors, and in this case, what I am going to do here is just apply the same color as well in green so that you can see the same exact example here, okay, to the background. So to all divisions, they are right now in red, and they have, of course, a certain amount of pixels of padding. So here, this RGB is what I am going to change, okay? So I'm going to copy this code, and I am going to paste these exact colors there, just as it is in green. So let's hit save, And in fact, you know what? We can actually play around with this. If we don't want this to be green, let's make it a different color, or let's just leave it in red, like the one we had before. Just so you can see some other examples. Okay, like that. So I am changing the codes here. Let's hit save. Going back to our code, let's hit refresh. Okay, so there you go. So we have the same red we were working before, but now that red is not been placed here with just color red. I'm using the RGB value. Okay, so now what I am going to do, before I show you the examples here that we are going to be taking a look at today, I am going to be changing the classes for this first, second, and third. Instead of just adding the numbers, we're going to name this example number 1, example number 2, and then here we're going to name this one example number 3. So we are changing the classes as well, okay, just to make sure that we do not get confused. So I'm going to hit save, and now I'm going to hit save here as well. Let me make sure nothing has changed. Okay, nothing has changed, so that's perfect. So now we're going to use the division of example number 1, okay, and inside of example number 1, we're going to be using Rgba code to work with this example, and we're going to use the same values: 2 to 1, 10, then another 10, and the last value is going to be the opacity that we want to give to this first division. Okay, so this is going to be 0.1. Now I'm going to hit here save, and let's make sure that I also apply well, because this here I was applying the opacity, right? But I need to make sure that I let the code know that this is for our background, okay? Make sure you include that property, because else your code is not going to do anything at all, okay? So there you go. So I'm applying that. Now I'm hitting save. Going back to our code, let's hit refresh. And one thing that I forgot to include into our code here, let's see here. Let's make sure to give it a little bit of space just to make sure everything looks more clean here. And I'm going to hit save, and let's go back to our code and let's hit refresh. And boom, there you go. As you can see now, this opacity is the same as the first one that you see here. But the difference with Rgba, with the background property, is that you can see the letters, okay? You can see the letters inside of this division. This is not being applied to all child elements inside of that division, as opposite as the opacity value. So that's what's going on. Let's go ahead and actually apply the same opacities we did to the other two. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to say example number 2, and then I will say example number 3. And I'm going to change the percentages here. The second one was 30% and this one was 60%, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. So let's hit save. Going back to our code, let's hit refresh. And boom, you see the opacity is the same, applying the property here, background, with Rgba colors and the opacity at the end. With this, if you want your content inside to be seen, then you perfectly can do it. Because if you apply some content inside of a division, then the division is going to miss that. The user is not going to be able to see it if you apply the opacity property, because the opacity property has been applied to the parent, the child, and all the family, okay? Rather than the background property with Rgba colors. That gives you the opacity that you want for the background, but at the end you are still able to see child elements like the text in this case. So that's another trick. That's another reason that you will like to use Rgba colors. And also, that's another reason that you would like to use the background property rather than opacity when applying opacity to your elements. So I hope everything so far is clear, but if you have questions, remember you can always leave them in the comment section below. and I will reply to them as soon as I can. So that's it for opacity. I think I covered everything that you need to know in order to create really great designs. But remember, I mean, it's all about studying, okay? Go into W3 schools here and take a look into some other examples that you can use and some other cool things that you can do here, and you will learn more and more. Okay? So that was it for this video, everyone. If you like the video, remember to give it a thumbs up. That helps me a lot. And if you're new to my channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so that way you get notified every time that I upload a video. And also remember that you can always ask Lixi. Bye, everyone, and see you again in the next episode.